God has a plan for me. How great Welcome to our Sunday evening Bible study for the Deerfoot Church of Christ. We are starting a brand new series from the book of Joshua, entering into the promised land. And for those of you who are watching this live, I want to make sure that you know we are still having our class for Rick Glass and John Gallagher. That's going to be via Zoom. And so if you'd like to go over to that using Zoom, you can watch that right now. And that way you could even watch this later on, because this class is going to be live streamed to our YouTube and Facebook channels. And so you can watch that when it's available. But for those of you who would like to have a lecture style class for your watching capability, this is what we're going to be streaming every Sunday night while we're digital. And so we're going to be in Joshua chapter 1. If you'll turn there, we're going to be looking at verses 1 and 2 and then giving a background to this book. And so I'd like for us to read verses 1 and 2 of Joshua. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. So I want us to notice three things for our lesson tonight. First, Moses is dead. I'd like for us to ask the question, why is Moses dead? And secondly, why Joshua? Why is Joshua leading the people? And in the third place, who are these people? All of which people are going into the promised land? These seem kind of like strange questions, but by getting the background, we'll understand a little bit more. So in the first place, why is Moses dead? Well, the children of Israel, they've seen 10 plagues as they were in Egypt. The 10 plagues represented the 10 different gods that they served within Egypt, and it showed that God, the God of Israel, the God of their fathers, was the God of creation, and He was greater than these foreign gods that were empty idols. And so God proved that He was the God of creation. And yet the children of Israel still complained. Once they had the Exodus, the leaving Egypt, we see that as they're in the wilderness, the complaints begin. Exodus chapter 14, Israel complained that Moses had brought them to the Red Sea, and if you'll recall, the Egyptians were in hot pursuit, and they said, "You've brought us out here to die," as they reached the water. But God proved that He is yet again the God of creation, and also the God that could control the water's edge, and it caused the Red Sea to part, and they walked on dry ground. By chapter 16, there in Exodus, the children of Israel complained about being hungry. He proved that He was the God of the heavens, as He was able to send the manna to feed the children of Israel. We understand they also complained about water, and the water they came to was bitter, and He was able to make that water sweet. By chapter 17, the children of Israel complained about water again, that there was no water, and that they, to the point, complained that they were about to stone Moses. "You have brought us out of Egypt to die of thirst." And Moses was told to strike the rock and water would come forth. But if you'll turn to Numbers chapter 20, I'd like for us to read verses 2 through 13, and we're going to see why Moses died without being able to enter the promised land. Numbers chapter 20 verse 2, it says, "Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and the people quarreled with Moses and said, Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into the wilderness? that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." Then Moses and Aaron went before the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock from them and give drink to the congregation and their cattle." So this is different. The time before, we saw that Moses in chapter 17 of Exodus was told to strike the rock and water came forth. But here in Numbers chapter 20, he is told to speak to the rock. This is key. Verse 9, "And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, 'Hear now, you rebels. Shall we bring water for you out of this rock?'" When he says we, he's referring to Aaron and to Moses and possibly to God. But the idea is he's combining. He's saying that he is on the level of God. Because he says, "Shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their livestock. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and through them he showed himself holy." So this was the time where Moses, he finally had enough, but he took matters literally into his own hands and disobeyed God. And as a result, God said that he and Aaron would not enter into the promised land. So that's why Moses died before entering 40 years later. And we'll be discussing why 40 years later based on the second point. Why was it Joshua? Why did Joshua bring the children of Israel into the promised land in Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 2? Well, if you'll recall, there were 12 spies that were sent into the promised land in order to spy it out and to bring back a report so that God could lead the children of Israel into this land of promise that he had given to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And in essence, you recall, the promise was that through Abraham's seed, all the earth would be blessed. Well, they would also be blessed with earth, the promised land, the land of Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey. So if you will turn to Numbers chapter 13, we'll discuss what took place when the 12 spies came back. If you'll recall, there were 10 of the 12 that gave a bad report about the land. And I'd like for us to read verse 32 beginning. It says of Numbers 13, and we're going to go all the way through chapter 14, verse 9. So these are the 10 spies, brought to 10 of the 12. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." And so he's saying we're not strong enough to be able to capture this land. And what they were saying is God's not big enough. God is not able to make this happen. Again, they forgot about God. It's been a consistent theme throughout the Old Testament, looking at the fact that they keep forgetting about God. But there were two that did not forget. If you will, let's look at chapter 14, just the next verse. It says, "Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, 'Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to one another, "Let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt." The fact that the children of Israel have said they want to choose a leader for themselves, they're going beyond God to do this. Moses did not just assume the role of leader. Moses was called by God to literally let his people go, to say those words to Pharaoh. God selected Moses, if you'll recall, from that burning bush. And so the children of Israel saying, we're going to create our own leader, man, they're in dangerous territory at this point. Let's pick back up in verse 5. It says, "Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the people of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, 'The land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey.'" I love that you have 2 people out of the 12, two people where 10 others are the majority that are saying this land it's filled with giants, where grasshoppers, this land devours its own people. We cannot even, we wouldn't even last a moment if we were to try to go into this land. But then you've got 2 who said the entire opposite. They had a positive focus. This is a land that's flowing with milk and honey. This is a land that if the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into this land. Notice they had the focus that God was going to bring them. And so for us today, I think it's very important. I think this applies really well to our present day, that God is in control. And it is so important that we put our trust in Him. You know, this format for our Bible class, it's more conducive to live streaming, but this focus, this topic is also so important. It's vital for us today to realize, you know, we've all had struggles that have gone on today. If we look to the Lord, then we'll know how to navigate come what may. Whatever befalls us in 2021, we will put our trust in God. That's where Joshua's focus is. Joshua and Caleb both have a positivity. How can they have this positivity? Because they've trusted in God. They've put their trust in the one who will lead them into unknown territory. For us today, we know that God is the one that's going to bring us into unknown territory as we're starting a brand new year. So let's pick back up in verse 9. The response was not just positive that God is able to do this, but they also gave a command to the people. Really, it's the first time we see a leadership role from Joshua and also from Caleb. Verse 9, "Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." So they not only did they stand out, being the minority over the 10, but they also showed that they could stand up for God and they could be a representative for God. They saw that God was going to be able to bring them. But notice, because of this attitude, they were saying that they were going to be rebelling against God. He's saying, don't do this. Do not rebel against God. Don't assume that you can take another leader and do your own thing. This is not, it's not within your power to do this. Or it's not within your right to do this. And so they stand up for God. So why was Joshua a leader? Well, he showed leadership early on, as while the others did not. And so the people's response, though, brings us to the final question. Notice he said, don't rebel. Well, the people didn't listen. People listened to the 10 rather than the 2. It's just really, it's easy to listen to the majority. But sometimes it's the smallest voices that make the most sense. And this is definitely the case here. If only they had listened to Joshua. In the third place, all of which people entered the promised land? Well, we know that it was that everyone from 20 years old and up did not make it into the promised land because of this punishment. But I'd like for us to describe or understand why and how this took place. In Numbers chapter 14, verse 10, so the next verse, then all the congregation said to stone them with stones. But the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the people of Israel. So it wasn't just Joshua and Caleb standing up. God appeared. God came before them. And at this point, they'd already seen the presence of God as He led them across the Red Sea, as He led them out of Egypt. By day, it was a cloud, a pillar of cloud, like a tornado, like a whirlwind. By night, it was a pillar of fire, like a tornado of fire. There's no missing the presence of the Lord. And God appeared before them. So what Joshua and Caleb said is, don't fear the sons of Anak, the Nephilim. Don't fear these giants in this land, the people who are just of great height. In fact, that's most likely where Goliath came from. He's one of the sons of Anak. And so they were just extremely tall. But they brought fear. And I find it interesting that the Lord appeared right before them. That's a time to fear. That He's a whole lot taller than these people, and He causes us to look so much smaller than a grasshopper. If you look at verse 11, it says, and the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people despise me, and how long will they not believe in me? In spite of all the signs that I have done among them, I will strike them with pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they. They have reason to fear because God is saying here that He would strike them all down and He would start over with Moses. Why was He going to start over with Moses? Well, if you'll recall, it was something God promised. To the seed of Abraham, all the earth would be blessed. And so based on His promise, He would continue, but He would continue through Moses. But it was Moses who interceded on behalf of the people in saying, you just went through 10 different plagues to prove to Pharaoh, to prove to Egypt that you were the God of creation. In fact, because Egypt was the strongest nation in the world at the time, then that would have proven to the whole world that God was the strongest. God was the God of Israel was the God of creation. Moses is saying, if you strike down all the people now, then what was the purpose of all of those things? In a nutshell, that's what he was saying. And so verse 20 says, then the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word. Okay, seems like crisis is averted. But verse 21 says, but truly as I live, and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, none of the men who have seen my glory and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have put me to the test these 10 times and have not obeyed my voice, shall see the land that I swore to give to their fathers, and none of those who despise me shall see it. So let's break this down here for just a moment. Notice, how many times have they put the Lord to the test? 10 times. By Numbers chapter 14, there's 10. That's since they left Egypt. 10 times God has been patient with them. As we saw before, it was when Israel complained that they'd been brought to the Red Sea, even though that God had just proven how many times that He was the God of creation. 10 times. They still thought that they were going to die because they were blocked by the Red Sea. God showed that He was able to part the waters, part the ways. Well, when it came to the time where they were thirsty and they came to bitter water, they said, you've brought us to a place that we're going to thirst to death. God was able to make that water from bitter to sweet. When they were hungry and they complained that they were going to die, God sent them manna. When they said that the manna was worthless bread, and they wanted meat, God sent them quail. 10 times they complained. When things aren't going the way we want them to go, complaint can easily take place. Well, we've got to recognize that God counted every time they complained, and yet God still fulfilled, stayed true to His word. He still fulfilled His promise. But here, this is a time where He's saying these 10 times they've complained, He's not going to destroy them with pestilence, with pandemic here. But He is bringing this judgment. And notice, what is the judgment? All who saw His miracles. All who saw the evidence that He was the God of creation. Every single person who saw the parting of the Red Sea, every single person who saw all 10 plagues that is 20 years old and up, will not enter into the promised land. So God means business here. So verse 23, verse 25. Now, since the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valley, turn tomorrow and set out for the wilderness by the way to the Red Sea. And the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, How long shall this wicked congregation grumble against me? I have heard the grumblings of the people of Israel, which they grumble against me. Say to them, As I live, declares the Lord, what you have said in my hearing I will do to you. Verse 29, Your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and of all your number listed in the census from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me, not one shall come into the land where I swore that I would make you dwell, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. Why was it the children of Israel that were 20 years old and up that would not make it into the promised land? Because this was the final straw. Because of their complaints, they would not enter into the promised land. And God means business when it says, Your dead bodies shall fall in the wilderness, and all of your number listed in the census from 20 years old and upward who've grumbled against me. Not one shall enter the land. But who would enter the land? Verse 33, And your children shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and shall suffer for your faithlessness until the last of your dead bodies lies in the wilderness. According to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, a year for each day, you shall bear your iniquity 40 years, and you shall know my displeasure. I, the Lord, have spoken. Surely this will I do to all this wicked congregation who are gathered together against me in this wilderness. They shall come to a full end, and there they shall die. So the children, 19 years and younger, would be the ones 40 years later who would enter into the promised land. And that gets us to our context for Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. Those who never saw the miracles of God that were performed to prove that He was the God of creation. They're the ones that were able to enter into the promised land. But I want us to stop, and I want us to think about what would that be like to wander for 40 years. Notice it was a year for every day that the 12 spies were in the land. A year for every day. Can you imagine that 40 years that they wandered, those who were 20 years old and up? Why did we complain? Why did we grumble? Because we're wandering to a place that we'll never get to see. And I want us to think, what would it have been like for the children of Israel to die in this way? Well, we know that there were many complaints that continued. We know that there were battles that they lost, and many lost their lives. In fact, because of the grumbling later on, there was a plague, pestilence that was placed on them of the poisonous snakes, and it was Moses who made the bronze serpent, and they were looked to, and they would be healed. We know that 24,000 died because of that plague. But later on, there was a census made of the new generation of those 20 years old and up, and it was 601,730 warriors that were 20 years old and above in the census. And it's explained that those would be the ones that would not make it into the promised land. 601,730 warriors. That's Numbers chapter 26, verse 50. So if you were to estimate from 601,730 men, then you double that, that's the women, but then maybe there were 20-year-olds there that if say 2.5 to 3 million, it's been estimated that that's the number of the children of Israel that crossed the Red Sea. 2.5 to 3 million people. That's a lot of people to cross in through the Exodus, crossing the Red Sea. Now, if we were to say 1 to 1.5 million lost their lives, and this is after all those pandemics, after the Korah's rebellion, the sons of Korah, if 1 to 1.5 million died on that 40-year journey, how many people would have had to die a day in order for them to all be gone by Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 2? Well, I did some research on it, and it's about 70 to 100 people could have died a day in this 40 years of wandering of those who were 20 years old and up. 70 to 100. That is daily being reminded of disobeying God and the punishment of it, the daily reminder of death, day in, day out, year in and year out, for 40 years. Those are 40 extremely challenging years for the children of Israel. And the reason I wanted us to study the book of Joshua for this coming new year is we've had a challenging year in 2020. We've been reminded of death. We've been reminded that life is short. We've also been reminded to trust in God. And so the fact that the children of Israel were reminded of death in the way that they were tells us that by Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 2, that I'd like to read again, it says, "After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel." God was fulfilling His promise. And now that we realize all of the situations that had to take place before this could happen, then what they were experiencing in the book of Joshua, I believe, will help us navigate 2021. I believe that it will help us. We've had a hard year to pass, and we've got a new year that's promising, only because we are bound for the promised land of heaven. I even thought, they were intense. This past year's been intense. But this concept of striving for a promised land that is eternal is so important. So Joshua is going to give us some fundamentals for how to navigate the brand new year that is approaching, that will also help to complement our theme for 2021, Get Ready. We're to get ready for heaven, but also get ready to give an answer. That's the focus we had this morning. But I believe this lesson is going to help us. The book of Joshua helped the children of Israel in their journey, and it will help us. But for the remainder of this lesson, for this moment, maybe you're here and you are needing help. Maybe you need encouragement. You need to be strong and courageous, and do not be afraid, because the Lord goes with you. Maybe you've struggled and you need the prayers of this congregation, and maybe we can be here to help you. One way you can do that is we have an invitation we offer, is to reach out to our elders at deerfootcoc.com, and we can maybe start there in knowing how to pray for you, pray with you. But maybe you're not a child of God and you would like to study with us. Let us know and reach out to us. We'd love to study with you. But let's focus for this coming year on striving to enter into the promised land. Let's bow for a word of prayer and we will close. Our Father in heaven, holy is your name. Father, we are so thankful that you have provided us with your promised land. And we realize that it has nothing to do with this earth. It has everything to do with heaven. And we want to strive to put our trust in you, come what may. And we realize that there are challenges that we face that would cause us to complain, but we just pray that we'll take the example of the children of Israel, and we will strive not to look to our own interests, not to look to our own purposes, but to strive to put our trust in you. I pray you'll be with us in this study and help us to put you first. Help us to take the elements of these 24 chapters of the book of Joshua, and that they will bless our lives. In turn, we will bless others. And we're so thankful that we have ultimately been blessed with the greatest gift, and that is your Son. And it's in His name we pray. Amen.